You don't hear me? Go louder.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Melissa Kilby here with Girl Up. I'm so excited for our second Sports for a Purpose conversation today. Hopefully some of you tuned in on Friday when we kicked off this series. Today we're going to talk about gender equality in media coverage of sports and just really talk about gender equality in sports in general because those are two of our favorite conversations. I'm really happy to be joined by 5 incredibly powerful women in sports, kind of all coming at this from a little bit of a different experience and expertise that they bring. So we have Georgia Shakeshaft, who's our teen advisor from Girl Up. We have Charlotte Flair, who is a WWE superstar and a great friend of Girl Up. We have Mary Kate Callahan, who is a paratriathlete, a medal-winning athlete. Really excited to hear from you. My friend, Dr. Jen Welter, who is was the first female coach in the NFL and is an incredibly accomplished football player herself, an incredible advocate for girls in football. And then we also have Olivia Wayne, who is here from the media side. So she is a sports journalist, and I think she's going to have a lot of great things to share with us. So anyway, we're gonna go ahead and kick it off. And Georgia, as our Girl Up leader, I'm hoping maybe you can start us off by sharing a little bit about what is Girl Up and what is our Sports for a Purpose program.
Sure, thanks, Melissa. So Girl Up's really close to my heart. It's really inspired this generation of girls and guys to really make a change for gender equality, and it's given girls the resources and ability to go out into their communities and make positive change, fundraising, doing advocacy actions, and really inspiring the people around them to make change. It's a really amazing organisation. Something that I really love about one of their latest campaigns, Sports for a Purpose, is it's a really powerful campaign because sports is something that connects all of us, and it's so beautiful in making sure that girls have the ability to recognise gender bias in sports, because gender bias in sports can be a really serious issue, and it gives girls the tools and resources to not only recognise it, but also make a difference in their communities where gender bias is.
Thanks so much, Georgia. Charlotte, I want to come over to you next. Obviously, WWE is such an important partner to Girl Up. Our partnership together actually helped us launch the Sports for a Purpose program, and you've engaged with Girl Up a couple times in our partnership. So I know one of the things that I love in the WWE story is the women's evolution and the journey from how female wrestlers and athletes have progressed. And I know you've been living that and driving that. So can you share a little bit about how your experience with WWE has changed, even in the most recent years, that maybe can give us all a little hope and inspiration to get started?
Absolutely. So I grew up watching WWE, but not necessarily as a fan or wanting to be a wrestler because my dad was a wrestler. I just was his biggest fan. But I did see the women at the time, and I didn't go, wow, I really want to do that, because they weren't being used in a way where they looked equal to men. They were either secondary storylines, or their looks or their body were being more used as the focus versus having time, major storylines, main eventing. However, in 2005, I did sit front row for Lita versus Trish, and they were the first ever main event for women. Now, move 10 years later, myself and Sasha Banks were the first main event 10 years later. So technically the second main event, but you're telling me it took 10 years to have another main event. So I started in WWE in 2012. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I just go, okay, I'm an athlete. I never grew up thinking that I was any less than the boys, but here I am working in this male-dominated world, but I go, okay, I can do everything that he can. And the class that I came in with was just as motivated and wanted to be just as good as the guys. So as the developmental system was working together, WWE hired a female coach to put more focus on us. And then in 2000, I'm sorry, I'm going to try to make this as fast as possible. But in 2015 on Raw and SmackDown, the hashtag Give Divas a Chance trended for 3 days on Twitter. And that's because the women were only given 2 minutes. It was like 2.5 minutes for a match, and the fans were just outraged. So if it hadn't have been for the fans and WWE listening to what the audience wanted, I'm not sure we would have been given the opportunity. But since then, we just had WrestleMania, there was 5 different female storylines happening. So we went from 2-minute matches to having the first main event last year of WrestleMania to having 5 different storylines this WrestleMania to main eventing to being pretty much you don't know who the top star is. It's either a male or a female. It's not just male dominated anymore. And I know that's a lot to take in, but going from having 2-minute matches to only having 6 girls to just being clustered together to having all these individual stars to saying we main evented WrestleMania, the largest show of the year, when everyone said 4 years ago that wasn't possible, is the most gratifying, astonishing thing to happen in our industry, in my opinion.
No, I totally understand it. And Stephanie McMahon was on with us. She talked about that main event as well, and just how proud she was of that evolution and that main event really being such a key marker. And Olivia, I want to actually come to you because you're in the media, right? Like, you're sort of seeing how this plays out, and WWE is an entertainment company. Like, they actually get to make their own decisions, and they get to do the coverage and the stories and everything else. And so I see how long that took, even within a contained industry and company. How are you seeing all of this play out in the bigger picture media, and where do you see the most progress? Maybe we can kind of keep it on the positive.
Well, I think ultimately, unfortunately, it's about revenue, isn't it? How it's like, if male sports or the kind of male version of the sport brings in more revenue, that's where kind of the rights holders and the kind of focus is always going to be, unfortunately. So I think more than just showing women's sport and showing and highlighting accomplishments by women, I think as soon as kind of advertisers and sponsors all get on the same page with how much value there is in using women athletes as great advocates for selling their products and all the rest, then it will level out. I think it's not just, unfortunately, I think it's a money game. Oh, well, duh. I mean, I think we all know that, but it's not just about abilities. But I do think there's progress for sure. I think, so I'm in England. So obviously our sports that we kind of focus on are different. Women's football, soccer, unfortunately is just not at the level of the men's game. It's just nowhere near. However, having women players become pundits and showing that they have a completely fantastic, obviously, grasp of the game, knowledge of the game, can speak eloquently and with experience when being a pundit, really helps kind of give credibility to women in the sport. But traditionally, the history of the sport was not a women's game. So it's just taking time to kind of, I guess, change the old guard's view, but women are doing that amazingly. And like during kind of World Cups and European Championships, having women, in the chair and talking, not just playing, really helps. And also showing that, women have things to say, not just how they look. They're not just the sidekick for a bit of, something to look at. They actually have an opinion and a voice. And that is definitely happening. It does take time, I guess. But also women's cricket over here, when they win World Cups and they're winning titles, that really helps. I know the, Women's World Cup was huge, the American team, it does play a part. It does help at the grassroots get girls involved, more playing, that helps. But I appreciate it's a slog. And I was wondering, was it literally the fans that overturned the storyline?
In my opinion, it was the fans. It's because
Right.
I think when Total Divas, our reality show that was part of the company, started, I don't want to give you an exact time, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, they saw the women as individual characters. And then when the women started to brand themselves, I think at that point, the audience was watching, like you had the Bella twins, you had Paige, you had Emma, you had AJ Lee. So you didn't, like, they each had their own little character, and you kind of saw that from the reality show. And then what was happening down at NXT was you had myself, Sasha Banks, Bailey, and Becky Lynch, and you could put characters, and then the fans literally, I think just one day was like, they could see the time that we were given in NXT versus the time that they were given on Raw. And it took, I think, that trending on Twitter to be like, okay, this is a wake-up call. Like, the audience actually wants to see the women. But I think it boiled down to branding. I think it's because they had to see us as individuals and not just like a group of pretty women. Like, they had to go.
That's the power of social media, isn't it? Like, it really can affect change in a positive way. It really does.
Yeah. But I think branding is a huge thing. Like, how the men are branded, the athletes, I think women need to really think about their social platforms and how kids and adults, men and women both, look at that, and how do you brand yourself to become an individual versus just like a group. And I think that's what the biggest thing is, like, the audience was connecting with the individual and not like, oh, there's a group of hot women in a ring wrestling. Yeah. And that's huge.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. And Olivia, your question about, like, was it the fans that helped put that? I think we saw that here in the US with the US women's national team, you know, the way that the community and the fans rallied behind them, and they had the confidence to kind of take their pay equity fight forward, and they were having higher ratings, and it just wasn't adding up. And so I think the power of all of us, right, of the fans and the community and the grassroots is kind of really where we're seeing so much change. I want to come over to you, Mary Kate. You are an athlete, right? And you are sort of living in this world as an athlete. And from the perspective of such an accomplished story of your own with your triathletes and your other things, why is media representation so important for female athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me specifically, I remember when I was, 5, 6 years old, I'm in a wheelchair. And so, female athletes with disabilities were not really represented in the media. And for me, getting involved in sport was, it was more about the inclusion. When I heard my friends talking about their soccer games or their swim meets, I remember wanting to do that just like them. And so for me, that was my entry point. But then I started recreationally just playing sports, swimming on a club team with other athletes who didn't have disabilities. And, I would look at what was going on in the media, and I never saw anyone like me being in a wheelchair represented in the media. And I think, Olivia, you kind of chimed in on it, but it's really just time. I mean, we're seeing this evolve. I think we saw this after the London 2012 games. You see more and more companies recognizing what these female athletes with disabilities are doing as athletes, not just as people with disabilities or as females. I think it's really just combining, them as an athlete, what they're accomplishing, the medals they're winning, the story they're able to tell, and, teach this next generation. One of my favorite things to just do is help other female athletes find what an athlete means to them, because there's so many different definitions of athlete. An athlete who just wants to be recreational and just be active is just as much as an athlete that's standing on a podium at the Olympic or Paralympic Games. And so, I think media is so powerful because you have that, female who's 5 or 6 years old looking at the TV, and they can see themselves saying, that's what I want to do someday. And, that's kind of how they get motivated. A little external motivation can trigger a lot of internal motivation and help them accomplish whatever dream it is from an athletic perspective. But, that's kind of what I looked for. And now, being on that other side of it, that's what I hope to be able to give back.
I was muted. Jen, are you there with us still?
Uh-oh.
Okay. Well, Georgia, I want to just come over to you and
I'm here.
Okay. Hi, Jen. So I don't know if you
I'm here.
heard that. Can you hear me, Jen?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay. So you are actually fully a role model now, and I think, you know, it's been amazing to see your social media and your brand, you know, after your experience coaching, and then, you know, coaching in Australia, coaching here in the other football leagues that I've seen. What is the responsibility and what is the role as a role model now? I know for so long you were an athlete grinding it out and you were working on your coaching career, and now it is really about how you're inspiring another generation of athletes. What is that role like for you now?
Yeah, I definitely want to first start with kind of what Mary Kate said. If you can't see that person that you want to be represented somewhere, it's really hard to dream that it's possible, right? Football in particular, I often say it suffers from sins of omission, meaning you don't have to tell girls that the game's not for them or that they can't play, because you can turn on the TV and NFL and you could watch all those games and maybe never see a girl. So it's hard then to imagine that you could have a future in it. And I know you're coaching in the NFL, and I was like, but I'm not, because it wasn't a dream I was permitted to have. And there was nobody I could look at and say, I want to be her. So for me now, it's really important to not only be there and be in the trenches with them, so that they can see that football can be for them and they can envision a future. I always tell them, like, they are the future, and we need full circle to change those conversations so that girls are in the equation at every turn, right? The pleasure of working with the folks from Madden, and this is Madden 20, and for the first time you could now choose a female head coach, right? Like, being in Madden to me was so important, because it hits from a socialization perspective. Girls could see themselves in a game, so being a coach is possible. And boys get to see that a coach could be a male or a female. And frankly, if they love defense, they're going to want to choose team shutdown, and your coach can be a male or a female. So for me, it's about not only walking the walk, but really being accessible and present, and having some of the conversations that other people don't think about because they haven't been there, right? Like, it is important, and the girls do deserve a voice. I mean, I know when I worked with the Keep Playing Like a Girl campaign, and I learned some of the stats on girls in sports, it changed it forever. Drop out of sport to our confidence. And the reasons that they gave for dropping out of sports, nearly 7 out of 10 said the following 3 things. Society doesn't support them in sports. They don't feel like they belong in sports. And there are not enough visible female role models in sports. And so to me, that was like, if I'm not that person, because we're different.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. I mean, I think that is like all of that just sort of wraps all of this together so importantly, and media is where we get to watch this if we're not at the sporting event live. And Georgia, I want to actually bring this back to you, because you are sitting there as a student athlete, as a young person, looking for role models, you know, looking for media coverage, looking for coaches, wanting to see athletes, wanting to see diverse athletes. You know, what is this like for you as you see yourself and your future as an athlete?
I think it's been really interesting. Like, I remember the first time I went to a basketball conference and they said, "Oh, everyone here is an elite athlete." And I sort of sat back and I was like, okay, what does this actually mean for me now? Like, it was a really interesting moment in my development as an athlete. And I've known for a long time that I'm not going to go professional, and I've been completely okay with that. But it's still a very important part of my life. And I've been really lucky to have a really supportive family and group around me of women that have been really supportive of me and encouraging me to not only do my basketball, but also go forward in my leadership with Girl Up. And that community from basketball has really pushed me and engaged me to do this. And it's like everyone said before, you've got to see yourself represented. And that's something I find really important, because I know I coach 3 or more sports like at school. There's a really amazing opportunity there for me to go out and coach younger girls, especially some that have never really found a passion for sport, and going out there and saying, look guys, like, you don't have to be the best player ever. Let's just go out and enjoy it. It's really powerful, and it really engages girls in sports in a way that they didn't know that they could, because I find that sports, sometimes for girls, it's if you're not the best, then why bother? I think that's a really common thing I see, like, especially with the media representation. If you're not the best as a woman, then often I say, why do you deserve the coverage? Because you'll see men at all levels of sport receive the coverage, but it's only really those top women receiving it. And letting girls know that you don't have to be in that top 1% of women to be important and to deserve good coaching and facilities is really an important message.
Anybody want to comment on Georgia's reaction there? Mary Kate? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like, for myself right now, I look at myself, my identity, one of my identities, I look at myself as, being a competitive athlete that's still competing. But then, I know that career is not going to last forever. And I look at, okay, what do I want to be in 5-10 years? And I look at that identity, and I think the most valuable identity that I have now is like all the other pieces that being an athlete has taught me, and being a female athlete has taught me, that are now, integrating with other aspects of my life that are outside of sport. But really it comes down to, the what hard work can teach you, what determination, time management, how all these other life skills that you learn from being an athlete can apply to so many other aspects of life. And, it's been really fun, as I was a collegiate athlete and now, racing professionally, I see, how these two worlds really mesh together. And, that's now when I do mentor and coach, younger female athletes, whether they have a disability or not, I also tell them, yeah, being a competitive athlete is, if that's the route you want to go, great. But, you can learn so many other things by just being involved in sport, and let sport kind of guide your path, whatever path that is. And it's really, I think the confidence that girls are getting through sport and realizing what the human body's capable of doing with a lot of hard work, or just the camaraderie that you get from being a part of a team. I think that's the value that I see in it, and that I hope to kind of continue to encourage from this next generation of athletes. So I think there's so much more than being the best of the best. And I think the stories that motivate me are those athletes that, it took 10 years to get to where they are today as an athlete, and nothing happens overnight, but it's that perseverance that got them there, that you want to continue to encourage this next generation with.
Olivia, go ahead.
I just thought, well, first of all, Mary Kate, I think you're absolutely right. Everything you're saying, we're all like nodding furiously. But I think, look, I am an athlete because I work out and train. As you said, everyone's an athlete. But, this is not my professional job to work out, that's for my health and well-being and sanity and all that stuff. But what I would say is, look, I think as women, there are always going to be some limitations due to things like children if you want them. There will be pauses in life if you want to follow that route, and you might not, and that's obviously fine. And that's and then that could have impact on your career or on your, athletic career. I think as long as, I don't think there's, unfortunately, ways to marry that against the men's game, as it were. Before we even went live, we're talking about the fact, oh, you might hear my baby crying. If there's a virtual panel with men, no one's discussing the baby crying with a man, but it's like, oh, sorry, I'm late, I was with my, so I think what you're saying is there's so much to take from being an athlete and playing sport. That is not just being that 1%, because unfortunately there will always be some elements that are going to be trickier to work around, and it's not immovable. But I will never forget, I was on air when Jessica Ennis-Hill had her first child, and breaking news, woman has baby. If it was a male athlete, we would not be doing a breaking news story that they'd had a baby. But it was like, a female has had a baby. Well, yeah, that's what we are programmed to do, or / that's what our body can do. But it was still news, and it's very hard to shift that mentality. I think it's going to be a little while until that is still, like Serena Williams when she had a baby, that is news. But if Roger Federer has a couple of pairs of twins, no one's really even talking about it, So I thought what Mary Kate was saying, that, take the other stuff as well, like go for number one, but also take the teamwork, take the, motivation and training, whatever, all the other positive aspects, because there are so many to be had.
Yeah, thanks, Olivia. Thank you all. I want to talk a little bit about airtime. So we know from our partners at the Women's Sports Foundation and their Equity Project that 3.2% of all sports media coverage is for women's sports. That's like singular 3.2%. And Charlotte, I'd love to just get your thoughts on this. Like, obviously you are in the middle of one evolution when it comes to airtime, but how do all of the Girl Up community that's watching, your fans, the audience for this conversation, what do you think that we can do to try to get more equal representation in the airtime? I know, Olivia, you spoke a little bit about revenue and that being a driver. Are there other things that our community can do? And what are the things that we can even maybe learn from WWE's evolution in your own airtime?
I can only speak from experience, but fighting for airtime is a weekly thing. Mm-hmm. It's just not given. And it really boils down to continuing to stay hungry, to not get, okay, so maybe I didn't get airtime last week. Maybe I only got 6 minutes, but I want 20 minutes. It's not to get discouraged. It's to continue to fight, knowing, okay, there's only, say, that 3% in sports, knowing that there's still so much more to be done, and just don't let one setback disappoint you. Like, for instance, this past WrestleMania, myself and my opponent opened the show. We got 20 minutes, and I'm going, well, a little more than 20 minutes. That is a lot of time for a male-dominated program, which I don't even consider male-dominated anymore. But to think that's a lot of time, to go, okay, how do I utilize that? How do I show the viewers that opening match, you're not thinking that's, oh, those are women. That's just a great match. And that's the biggest thing, is not saying, okay, that's female sports, that's men's sports. It's just sports. And that's what you have to constantly think about, especially in our world, because if you tune in and you go, oh, the ladies are on. Okay, well, that's not, oh man, this story's good. Oh, this fight is good. Oh, they're really aggressive. Oh, that's a star. Instead of, oh, the women are on. Like, that's what you have to fight for every week. And it's working together. And at WWE, I think that's what keeps the momentum, is realizing kind of what Georgia and Mary Kate said, there's that 1% that's the best. They're just getting the time. No, it's the collective effort from the person at the top to the person at the bottom, continuing to work together, because it's always going to be this. Whoever's at the top will be at the bottom in our industry. And it's working together and showing that the women are working together and not pinning each other against each other. Like, it's always working as a team, even if it's an individual sport.
Yeah, totally.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Olivia, this is your business. Like,
Sorry. That's why
no,
I'm like,
please, I want you to jump in. Yeah.
I thought you want to interrogate, but Charlotte, I found, because you are sport, but also entertainment, and obviously all sport is entertaining, but it's really interesting because I feel like, you know, the bosses and the networks, it's like a different mentality, I assume, programming wise. But it just, every time, like when you're saying that, it kills me because there's no male wrestler going out and thinking, I have to make sure that we're in my story. That's all they're thinking. Like, it's just frustrating to hear that that's on your mind.
No,
Right.
no, but that's the one thing that I'm so proud of being, like, that's why I always talk about sports, is because my athletic background is what brought me to the company. It wasn't because I was a good spokesperson or a model or a diva or an actress. It was like, okay, I really love sports, and okay, I've never wrestled, but I'm sure I could learn this from, you know, the basketball, the swimming, the gymnastics, the track that I played. But it's the fact that the audience was recognizing me as an athlete and not just some pretty girl. And that's what, like, is the main focus for our company, is going, when you tune in, okay, those are athletes.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's frustrating, but that's what
I'm not used to.
Like, that's basically my message, is like, when fans go, oh, this is a WWE superstar, and maybe the first female that's getting recognition and she's being talked about that she's wrestling like a guy. Versus, but then you go, wait, that's so sad to hear, oh, there's a woman wrestling like a guy. But it's breaking that, going, okay, I'm so tired of hearing the term women's evolution. When is the evolution going to stop? And it's just going to go male and female superstars. But it is what it is.
Yeah.
So sorry, Olivia,
No, you go. It's your thing. Sorry.
You're good. This is your business. Your perspective is so important. But Jen, I want to come back to you as, you know, a woman's football player, American football, which is such a male-dominated sport. And as an athlete, and just even the awareness of this as a sport, and what your experience was like playing football, and you know, even just did people know that this existed, and how did the sort of idea of coverage and awareness and having fans, what was that experience like? And, you know, what do you take forward from that experience when you're working with girls who want to play football?
Taken over screen time. For some reason, he just has immediate praise. So this is Tyson. But as a player in football, what was interesting is, you know, we were not a part of the conversation, right? Like, and it's still a rare conversation to this day. I used to lovingly tell people we were the best kept secret in sports. We just didn't want to be a secret. It's considered America's game. Furthest to go in terms of gender equity. It's the one sport that doesn't have parity at any level, from peewees to the pros. And, you know, for those of us who have played, you know, I remember winning my first gold medal with Team USA. And we came back, and it was like, okay, you know, that was 2010. And it was like, okay, this must be the tipping point, right? We won the gold medal. We went international. We showed how good we could be. And I wrote a piece. Actually, that was after the second one. I wrote a piece, and we couldn't even get the covered written piece on ESPN. And it was already written, right? It was, you know, we didn't go medals, and we had gone to the White House, and we reached out, and they said, well, there's just not an audience for it. Well, women in football doesn't sell. And I was like, pretty sure I was the first So how do you know if you haven't tried, right? And yet that is the narrative. And it's still to this day, the women's leagues that play and do it, you know, the right way, there is a lack of coverage, which makes it very hard for, you know, then girls to see themselves in the game. So I think, you know, you have a great example here on WWE on how the fans got loud. I mean, I remember I was at the WWE Evolution, the first all representative for She Is, which WWE is a part of. And that was a pledge for powerful women in sports to cross-pollinate other sports, right? To make sure that we're amplifying that it's not these are, you know, are rad. And, you know, maybe I'm 5'2", so basketball wasn't really my natural sport, but I'm going to go support these amazing women in basketball so that we can increase the conversation surrounding it. Because if it benefits football and it benefits, you know, WWE and basketball and Paralympics and all of these things, then we all rise, right? We can create a voice. And so for all of the girls up girls, follow, like, share, be loud, be proud about the fact that there are these great women in sports and make the dollars make sense. Do the example that Charlotte just gave of the fans of trending about it for, you know, 3 days, because we have to make the dollars make sense. And that's not pennies, that's intellectual sense to the advertisers and to the drivers, because football still has a way to go. I mean, I've now done 35 girls camps across the country because nobody was coaching the girls. And we were the first ones to do it, right? Like, why is this so hard to get to? But it takes seeing it from all angles, right? Like, and it takes us saying what we need in terms of the society, and then it being amplified by all of the voices. Because the beautiful thing about now is that there are means for us to have those communications, and every one of us does it. And at women's sports and in journalism, we owe it to each other to tell, share, like, enhance other people's stories, because the reason why we still have the guys as heroes and the women kind of as a caveat is a lot of the time it's the social media and impact that they think that they can get from supporting those storylines, whether it's WWE or another sport.
Yeah, Jen, thank you so much. I think, you know, I was starting to look through the Q&A that we're getting in from our audience, and we're gonna turn over to those questions here pretty soon. So if you're listening and you have questions, definitely add those into the Q&A box. But you know, the ask was what is it that folks can do? Obviously buying tickets and tuning in for coverage and you know, getting those eyeballs on the sports and on the channels and on the media is important. But really just thinking about what are some of the other things that folks can do. And so I want to go actually to a first question that I see from the Q&A. And Georgia, this is for you. I think Mary Kate, you might also be able to chime in on this. But one of our viewers was asking about, you know, for female sports and schools especially, there's limited resources, there's limited equipment, there's limited practice time, there's limited space, because, you know, if the male sports are being prioritized, then the female sports are sort of competing amongst themselves for what's left. And was just really curious what your experience with that has been. And then have you thought at all about, you know, with your Girl Up work and with your fight for equality in sports for a purpose, is there an action at the school level in that frame?
There's always an action there to take, I think. I've been really fortunate to go to an all-girls school that has a really amazing established competition. So we're given so many resources. But, you know, there are places that do not get the resources, and they don't make that connection between girls and sport, and they don't know the benefits of girls playing sport and what they are, or they simply don't think it's important enough. But you've got to make space for yourself. Even though it's hard, you've got to say to your team, okay, guys, we're not getting enough training time, or we don't have the equipment the boys are having. And I think it's also important to go to the boys team and say, look guys, can you recognize this please, that you guys are getting the resources and the funding, and then go to the people in power and say, look, do you see this disparity here? Because it's obviously unequal, and you've got to rally your troops behind you and make sure you've got that support base there. It's really important in going up and saying, look, this isn't okay. It's never been okay. And that's what you've got to do, and you've got to make space for yourself. And if that's not working, you've got to go out and say, okay, if we can't train at school and school isn't letting us, and maybe we rally together and we fundraise for the resources as a team, and then we go to the local park to train instead. Because if they're not going to provide the resources for you, then you have the right and responsibility as an athlete to say, okay, this is my sport, this is under my control, we should go take ourselves elsewhere. And then maybe your school will recognize, okay, the fact that they have to go elsewhere to train and get their own resources, that's not okay. So you really just got to make your own space for yourself.
Mary Kate, do you want anything? I know that has to be quadruply, exponentially the case for you and the additional sort of resources needed.
Yeah, definitely. I think I love, Georgia, what you said about make space for yourself. I saw it at a young age, even with that they didn't want to give the resources. And, I'm looking at it from kind of two perspectives, one from being a female athlete and one from being an athlete with a disability. But there was a huge educational gap, and they didn't know how. Maybe it was a coach who's never coached someone who had a disability, or, for me, in our case, it was, a governing sport organization that didn't want to qualify for the sectional state championship meet. And it wasn't necessarily that they didn't want to, it's that they said no or kind of pushed it to the sidelines because they didn't know how. So, I looked at that as the opportunity to educate these, senior leaders of what disabled sport is, how to include us, how to competitively include us, not just, include us for the sake of including. As an athlete at heart, I wanted to be as competitive as possible. I wanted to be held to the same standards as, able-bodied athletes were. So, I look at it as the opportunity of how do I go out and educate others about, the Paralympic movement and what female athletes are doing in that realm, to hopefully enable them with the resources to, expand their programming at whatever level it may be, whether it's youth or collegiate or competitive. Really showing how you could really collide two worlds of, able-bodied sport and disabled sport into one, and really integrate it in a way that makes sense for both parties. So, a lot of it's just explaining and educating, and sometimes you feel like a broken record, but again, it's just that repetitive. If you get down, get right back up and explain it again, explain it in a new way, and when you're passionate about something, I find it hard to be quiet. And, when I was 16, 15 years old, I was so passionate about this, and, never in a million years did I think I'd be involved in a lawsuit about inequality in sport. But because I felt so passionate about it, and because I wanted, this next generation to have the same sense of inclusion with sport, I felt so strongly about it. I wasn't going to sit down. I was happy to sit in depositions because it's something I believed in wholeheartedly. And, when we got to the end of that, you have those memorable moments, and I look to my left and I look to my right in the pool, and I look at these athletes with disabilities, female athletes with disabilities, who were there because they were athletes, not because they were females, and not because they were people with disabilities, because they were truly athletes at heart. And, that's one of those memories that I'll never forget. But, as sense from statistics perspective, has doubled and quadrupled the number of female athletes participating in high school sports. So, that statistic alone is why at that age I stood up for what I did. And, again, it's just using the education we have as athletes and as female athletes to educate others.
Yeah, definitely. And you all do that so brilliantly, and it's such an important part of all of your platforms and work, and I commend you all for that. I'm going to combine a couple questions from the Q&A and kind of put this out a little bit more to an open an open call. Obviously, there's a lot more to sports than just the athletes, right? There's coaching, there's the media and the broadcasters and working in, even for sports entertainment companies, there's the storytellers, right? There is a lot more jobs to be done in the sports world that actually have huge influence on what gets covered, what is the story being told, how are we positioning women's sports as a story, as the way that we can influence mainstream. So I'd love to just kind of open up, from your experiences separate from being an athlete, how do you think we can create more space for women in the industry, knowing that there are some key places in the industry that actually can impact that coverage, that respect, that sort of elevation of all of our sports and all of our individual stories. I don't know, Charlotte, Jen, if either of you want to come in. I know Olivia, you're going to have thoughts on this too, so I'll come back to you.
I know for us, having a female producer, which was kind of unheard of, but when I debuted on the main roster in 2015, they hired the first female producer, and having a female in the room full of men fighting for us, I think made a huge difference. Now, there's multiple female producers and they work with the men as well, and the men work with us, but having just a woman in there fighting for us, knowing what we go through, knowing that unfortunately, yes, we do have babies, we do have different needs than the men do, and having someone being able to relate to us and also fighting for us, I think made a huge change. And then as well, in our company, there's so many different positions, but having a female announcer, a female referee, a female on commentary, a female in talent relations, a female in almost every component, like our business is not just the talent in the ring. There's so many different, we have so many different departments that make us who we are, but having a female in every single one, and then having a top female like Stephanie McMahon at the very top makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Jen, thoughts from your side? I know from both the coaching side, but also the business side, right?
Yeah, I think, first of all, if we want to change how things are, there's obviously having the conversations, but then there's also, creating lanes that are ours, right? Like you said, having a female producer. Well, if there's different content and storytelling, then, we need to create some of those outlets. Look at the shift in storytelling from someone like Reese Witherspoon's perspective, who's made sure she is going to show women differently in her movies, right? These are places that we can impact through ownership, and then also really carving out that we're not, women in sports, and the storylines are not shrink it and pink it, and it's bubble wrapped for girls. Like, that we are interesting and multidimensional and, doing all these crazy things, and that we want to build interest in those ways. So we need to, like Charlotte said, we need to have those prominent women that are in all elements of the business, because they see different parts of it. And also, if you are a smart business person, you realize that, for example, 87% of purchasing power lies with women. So if you want the women to buy, whether it's WWE tickets or, to support the Paralympic athletes or to go to an NFL game, then there are conversations that the women have to be included in. And the storylines that women often follow are ones that they get to relate to the athletes as people, right? For example, I used basketball as an example because I didn't play it. But I will go to a basketball game to support one of my friends, right? Like, I've gone and supported Nancy Lieberman many times, right? She's a great friend. So I'm going to go because I love Nancy, and basketball is great, but I wouldn't just pick up and go to a game randomly. But the emotional connection will move the needle, both in terms of involvement, engagement, and purchasing. So then knowing that this is a way that will motivate more women to get involved, and if you want families to go, they're going to be probably the ones buying the tickets, then we need to make sure that both the coverage and how it's conveyed is digestible and content that women want to absorb, which means women have to be speaking up for the fact that, you know, they want to see girls that are doing the same wrestling moves as the guys are, and they don't want them to just, like, you know, wave high and like run off in a bikini, right? Like we want them to develop, we want the stories, and without having women and girls in those conversations, nobody maybe knows to raise their hand and be like, hey, have you realized that that's not exactly how it is?
Yeah.
Kind of
Olivia. Oh, go ahead, Charlotte, please. Yeah.
another thing that made a huge difference within WWE, and I know kind of what Olivia talked about in terms of what sells. One of the biggest shifts I've seen in the last 6 years is if you come to a live event or a TV event for WWE, I don't know exact numbers, but maybe 80% of the audience is wearing female merchandise. And that's proving to the company that each character, whether you're wearing Sasha Banks glasses, whether you're wearing Alexa Bliss gloves, whether you're wearing Asuka shirts, it's that, okay, there are little boys in the audience, there are grown men in the audience. Actually, there's entire families, and the mothers of these families are buying female merchandise, and it's being able to make that merchandise relatable to men and women, and that it's selling. It's proving that women sell. And they do when there's a woman fighting, saying, okay, like when you look at a woman, oh, she's just in a bikini, it's this. No, this character has all these things in this individual character, and those little trinkets you can make as merchandise and sell. Whether it's a robe, whether it's glasses, whether it's just proving that that women are relatable, and it's having a woman like in those positions selling, saying, okay, no, you can take this and brand it. I think that's kind of what you're saying with like NFL games and the shirts and the gear. And that's another aspect of it. Any sport, it's having them wear part of the team.
Yeah. Olivia, I'm just going to let you open comment on this.
Well, the thing is, sorry, I'm so bad at the Zoom thing. I keep thinking I'm speaking to my friends, having a laugh. Like I should leave my computer alone. Anyway, the thing is, though, the thing I keep thinking about Charlotte and what she's saying, which is absolutely spot on, is that she is in a sports entertainment field. And I feel like that is a huge difference in terms of, you know, your fans and supporters are probably, like, as you say, it's like a different type of thing. Like football over here is tribal. It's not just... I bought into like that storyline. It's not like that. It's like you grow up with this kind of affiliation to your team from before you're born. It's in your family. It's, you know, it's where you come from. It's like, not only is it tribal, you know, in the past it's been aggressive and like gang-like, you know, so it's quite a different shift. And I guess the women's game is so new in many sports that it's just not like that, you know. But in terms of the thing I've always loved about sport and why I wanted to get involved in, you know, being a broadcaster of sport, is that it's about the story, it's about the heart, it's about the drama, and that is absolutely something that the women's game can have and should have. And I think it's about how, unfortunately, the media portray it, which is why, you know, again, the revenue element. But I think what Charlotte is absolutely right, and Jen, is that, you know, there is purchasing power from women, but it's about, I guess, sponsorship being about brands that connect, and, you know, there's so much involved that I don't know. I just relay the information, and I'm not in that zone of it. But and again, what you said about the producers, your producer bit, a female producer, where I worked, which is at Sky Sports, I stopped to have babies, and I've just had another one, so I'm still on pause. But there were women in every element of the kind of production side of a news media outlet station, which was brilliant. I'm having a note saying my internet connection is unstable, so if you can't hear me, just wave and I'll stop.
We're good. You're
but
good.
having women producers, directors, and everything in between makes a huge difference, other than it doesn't bring in as much revenue. So we're just not going to get the airtime right now until that shifts. For me, it's all about that, unfortunately. Because the stories are there, the heart's there, the excitement, the all of the stuff you need for the great kind of visuals and everything, it's all there, other than potentially, what it yields financially.
Charlotte, were you trying to jump back in there and
Oh no, I was just gonna say, it's like sports entertainment. It's the simplest story. It's good versus bad, and it's almost like I look in the United States. It's like a lot of people don't like the Patriots because they always win. So it's like the bad football team. Within every sport, you have like the good team, the bad team, versus you have that team that you love. And it's utilizing those simple stories and saying, okay, that's the favorite player. Maybe that girl at the time is going to sell the most jerseys, and that's just life. Maybe she is in the 1%, but it's in any sport or any team. You always have an internal story with the hero and maybe the bad player or whatever, and it's you using that to show, okay, this deserves to be told, and use that. And that's kind of what we do with the women, but it's how do you make that marketable, and it's just the story.
Yeah. So really quick, and we're getting close on time, though. I think we have a couple minutes for a few quick questions. And Mary Kate and Jen both, I wanted to ask you about how brands can actually influence media and this airtime and this coverage and this revenue conversation, because there is the sort of the commercials outside of the programming. And I know, Mary Kate, you referenced sort of seeing Paralympians when it's the Olympic brands and the commercials. And I know, Jen, you've had some of your own brand partnerships, and how that has elevated you as a female athlete and as a female leader in the sports world. If you guys could just super quick, how do you think brands, and how can we as consumers influence brands to actually add additional sort of airtime and coverage, if you will? Either one of you can start first.
Yeah, I mean, I think and again, kind of tapping into what you said and what Olivia said at the beginning about time, but really we're seeing brands recognize these female Paralympic athletes for the athletes they are. And I think, while they have their story of how they got into sport, or, how they became the athlete they are, that's important. But I think what was going unrecognized for a long period of time was the brand recognizing the true competitive athlete that they are. And they're breaking these world records, and their countries are sweeping the podium, and that was going unrecognized because they were focusing so much of the background story. And I think as a Paralympic athlete, that was super frustrating, because blood, sweat, and tears go into every training session, and you work hard to be the athlete you are, and you want your athletic accomplishments to be looked at just as much as your Olympic or your able-bodied athlete. And, that was going unrecognized for a really long period of time. But I think, this groundbreaking moment happened after London 2012, was where brands and these big brands are recognizing the true competitive athlete these female athletes were and are becoming. And I think that has literally erupted another generation of competitive athletes. And, we're seeing athletes get involved in it's just, these brands are slowly recognizing that athlete. And, the more they can do that, the more it's going to educate the greater population about what the Paralympics are, who these name brand athletes are. I mean, Tatiana McFadden, as an example, that's now becoming a household name. Whereas, before London, people really didn't know who these Paralympians were, or these athletes with disabilities were. But I think the more we can get brands to recognize that and recognize their athletic achievements, the more, the greater population in our audience is going to recognize, what these athletes are doing.
And then hopefully tune in to watch them and buy the tickets
and follow them and
drive the revenue and all of those things. Jen, just a couple quick words from your experience working with brands.
Yeah, I think the big corner that I turned in terms of working with brands was Adidas. They came behind me personally as a Women in Football, which was the first time a major athletic brand had signed a female football asset, right? And they also came behind the girls' camps. And then we worked together to move the needle and make sure that girls in football are in those conversations. They also went and became the uniform sponsor of the WNFC. So essentially, as I like to say, I got in the door and we had a great relationship. And then now I found a way to not only have them have, like when they did the Super Bowl promos, not for this year, but the year before, they put out a comic series. And, you had like Juju and Mahomes and Snoop and Coach Jen, right? And right in the mix with it. So it kind of gives it a new normal in the content and the storytelling that they're doing with the guys, which, says, oh, well, a coach can be a female or a male, right? And that inclusion in things like that really moves the needle in terms of normalcy, right? So I'm really proud of them, and even getting into like the She Breaks Barriers campaign and coming in other ways. And part of that is a pledge in terms of the visibility too. Obviously, people always say, are you satisfied with the progress? I'm like, listen, they say patience is a virtue, and clearly I've lost mine because we all want it right now. But when the good thing is that there is a proof positive thing to momentum, right? Like you said, 2012. And, your fans in WWE have shown that, hey, not only do we like it, we love it, we want more of it. So when you start to see brands making those moves, then you see others that go, oh, wow, that worked really well, or that got positive response. So we need those brands like Adidas that lead from the front, and then to be able to have those creative conversations, right? Like the campaign and the work that I did with Orly, like, most people don't see, for example, like a fusion between beauty and football, or females in sports. Sometimes even they have a hard time with that leap, but to have been able to come out with a nail polish that was in Ultas all over the country, and literally you have like fingernails on a football, those things push the status quo. And when they work, right? And that's the important part. When they work, other companies say, well, okay, how can we do something like that? Right? Like I can then go to another brand and say, we were the number 3 nail polish launch in Ulta history. Yes, females in football can be a thing. Right? Like this can be a thing.
Yeah.
It's just hard when you're at the front end of moving the needle, because you are the one who's got to set the standard, because when those things don't work, you're also working, you've also got that in the equation too, because when it doesn't launch and it's kind of painful.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jen. I know you've been at the front of a lot of those pushes, and we
some more painful than others.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have one last question. I'm going to hit it over to Georgia, who is our Girl Up expert here as a young woman, taking this all in, really thinking about this from the activism lens. We've had a couple men on the Q&A kind of asking about, for our male fans, right, who like to watch women athletes, who appreciate the sports. And I'm sure I know you're at a girls' school, but in your community, you have your boys' sports and your friends, and also just what you want to see, right? How do you think that we can reach out? How can our male fans, male allies, male supporters help move the progress forward on gender equality in sports?
Yeah, well, I know as a female athlete, my mum, not a sport person, my dad has really driven my interest in female sports. He pointed out women in sports to me. I know Australian football rules, AFL, really big part of my family's sport. when we had the first female referee, Dad pointed out and went, wow, how amazing is that? Like, that's incredible. And I went, wow, that is incredible. Like, he really drove me to see the representation, and that was really powerful. So, you know, it's, as a young girl, seeing older men saying, wow, like, these women in sport are breaking barriers, and walking into the living room and seeing the AFLW or the women's basketball or the netball on TV was really powerful. So it's showing your daughters and sisters and making it normal is really, really powerful. Like, as Jen was saying, you know, making women in sport normal is really important. And men often, as like that leading figure, can often say like, wow, this is amazing. Look at this woman doing this, and shine light on women because they have a lot of power. Like when someone said, oh wow, Serena Williams is the best female athlete, and there was people saying, men saying, no, she's the best tennis athlete, she's not the best female. And that was a men that stood forward and said, no, she's just the best. That's really powerful, shining a light, because men have the spotlight, and shifting that over, saying, wow, look at these women and look what they're doing is powerful. Showing up to those games, even just locally, seeing brothers and fathers sitting down and cheering on the sidelines of women's sporting games, young women's sporting games, is really powerful to have that voice there saying, you know, they're all the same and there's nothing wrong with that. Saying, oh, let's go watch this women's basketball team, like let's go watch the under 14 girls play because they've got some really amazing athletes. That's really powerful.
Yeah.
And, you know, making it normal and making it so that they're using their power to shed it onto women, that's incredibly important.
Thank you, Georgia. I love kind of bringing it home, right? Like bringing it right home into your living room, into your family, into your personal connections. And I think so many of us women can do all of those same things, right? We can watch the sports, we can buy the merchandise, buy the tickets, go to the girls' games in our schools and do all of those things too, from the camaraderie. I want to go ahead and close this out. I know we're a little bit over time, but you women have so much great perspective and advice. And I think each of you coming at this was such a unique experience, but all really for this effort of how do we elevate the athlete that happens to be female? How do we celebrate her for what she has accomplished? How do we highlight role models that show young women and young men around the world that there is an industry here and there is a place to influence and there is a place to make change? And I think you've all left us with such great advice and such great example. And I thank you all so much. Again, one of our big call to actions for this series is to find role models, to talk to them, to ask them questions. You all are new role models for me. And so thank you for answering my questions today. And we'll wrap it up from there. So thanks so much, everyone.